Hudson Allen fired me at the quarry face, claiming women couldn't handle dynamite. I was the only certified blaster he had. When he handed the detonators to a rookie to save a few bucks, I didn't beg for my job. I just packed my gear, called my property lawyer, and waited for the inevitable collapse that would hand me the keys to his entire multi-million-dollar operation. The limestone dust at Allen Aggregates had a specific taste. It was chalky, metallic, and permanent. By the time I was 48, that dust had settled deep into the creases of my face and the soles of my steel-toed boots. I had given 22 years of my life to this massive, gaping crater in the earth. For the last 10 of those years, I was the lead blasting engineer. I was the one who calculated the charge weights, measured the drill hole spacing, and ensured that thousands of tons of rock turned into profitable gravel without bringing the entire mountain down on our heads. It was 5:30 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. The floodlights were still cutting through the morning fog as I walked the north wall. I held my digital blasting galvanometer, meticulously checking the circuit continuity of the detonator wires we had laid the previous afternoon. Up here, a single miscalculation didn't just cost money, it cost lives. Tommy Riggs, the veteran quarry foreman, trudged up the gravel incline behind me. His high-vis jacket was smeared with grease, and his face carried the heavy, exhausted look of a man who was only 2 years away from a pension he desperately needed. "Morning, Sophia," Tommy grunted, handing me a battered thermos of black coffee. "Wiring looks clean from the lower bench." "It is," I replied, taking a sip of the bitter, scalding liquid. "But the rock on this north face is fractured. The structural integrity is unpredictable. We need to delay the secondary blast sequence by 40 milliseconds to prevent a backbreak into the main high wall." Tommy nodded slowly, wiping his brow with a dirty rag. "Whatever you say, boss, you're the one with the federal licenses, but you should know, the new kid is here." My jaw tightened. "Kid?" "Hudson Allen," Tommy muttered, lowering his voice as if the wind itself might report back to the front office. "The old man's funeral was barely a month ago, and the son has officially taken over. He pulled up in a sports car that costs more than my house. He's been auditing the payroll since yesterday. He wants to speed up production by 30%. I looked out over the massive quarry. Old man Allen had been a tough, stubborn boss, but he respected the rock. He respected the danger. Hudson, on the other hand, was a 32-year-old business major who had never held a shovel in his life. He saw the quarry not as a living, breathing, dangerous environment, but as lines on a spreadsheet. 30% means we cut corners, I said, handing the thermos back to Tommy. "I don't cut corners on explosives." "I know you don't," Tommy sighed, looking nervously toward the administration trailer at the bottom of the pit. "Just be careful today, Sophia. He's looking to make his mark. He wants to prove he's the alpha dog now." I scoffed, turning my attention back to the yellow wire spools. I had survived in this male-dominated industry by being twice as smart and 3 times as careful as anyone else. I had earned my state and federal blasting certifications through grueling exams and thousands of hours of apprenticeship. I didn't care whose name was on the company letterhead. Gravity, pressure, and dynamite didn't care about a silver spoon. At 6:15 a.m., the siren wailed across the valley. I retreated to the blast bunker, initiated the final countdown, and engaged the firing mechanism. The earth rumbled beneath my boots. A perfect, controlled wave of destruction rippled across the north face, bringing down exactly 4,000 tons of limestone, leaving the high wall perfectly intact. It was a masterpiece of engineering. But as the dust settled, I saw Hudson Allen waiting for me outside the bunker, holding a clipboard and a scowl. Hudson Allen was standing ankle-deep in quarry mud wearing pristine, designer Italian loafers. His tailored navy suit was utterly ridiculous against the backdrop of massive excavators and rock crushers. At 1:15 p.m., the sun was beating down on the limestone, creating a blinding glare, but Hudson didn't seem to notice. He was too busy glaring at me. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my work glove and walked down the gravel embankment to meet him. Tommy Riggs was standing a few paces behind Hudson, staring intensely at his own steel-toed boots, refusing to make eye contact with me. That was my first red flag. "Hudson," I said calmly, keeping my tone professional. "I hear you're looking to increase our yield on the north face. If you have a minute, I can walk you through the structural limitations of that wall." Hudson didn't extend his hand. He looked me up and down, his lips curled in a tight, condescending smirk. "Sophia Young, lead blaster. At least, that's what payroll says. You're pulling down an executive-level salary to play with fireworks in the dirt." I stiffened. "I hold an unrestricted federal explosives license, Hudson. I manage the safe extraction of 3 million tons of aggregate a year. My salary reflects the fact that I keep your equipment intact and your men out of the morgue." Hudson chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. He clicked his expensive silver pen and made a quick mark on his clipboard. "My father was an old-fashioned man, Sophia. He let his employees run the asylum. He overpaid for experience because he was afraid of change. I am not my father." "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, squaring my shoulders. "I'm saying we are restructuring," Hudson replied, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I've reviewed the blasting logs. You're too slow. You take too long calculating charge depths. You use too many delay detonators, and your safety protocols are bottlenecking the excavators." "Those protocols are mandated by the Mine Safety and Health Administration," I fired back, my voice echoing slightly against the rock walls. "You speed up the drilling without proper spacing, you risk a high-wall collapse. The rock up there is heavily faulted." Hudson took a step closer, invading my personal space. "Here's the reality, Sophia. I don't need a middle-aged woman lecturing me about rock formations. This is a heavy industry. It requires speed, grit, and a certain type of constitution. Frankly, women don't handle dynamite. They handle paperwork, and you don't fit the new corporate image." The sheer audacity of the statement hung in the dusty air. He wasn't just firing me, he was trying to humiliate me. He wanted me to argue, to raise my voice, to give him a reason to call me hysterical. I glanced at Tommy, who was practically shrinking into his high-vis vest. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I looked at Hudson's clean, uncalloused hands, then up to his smug eyes. "You're firing the only certified blaster you have on staff to save a few dollars," I stated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You have no idea what is holding that north wall up." "I've already hired your replacement," Hudson sneered, handing me a crisp white envelope. "A young guy, hungry, willing to do the job for half your bloated salary. Clear out your locker, Sophia, you're done." I took the envelope. I didn't open it. I looked past him, up at the towering, jagged north face of the quarry. I knew every fracture, every weak seam of clay hidden inside that stone. "Good luck, Hudson," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You're going to need it." I turned my back on him and walked away, my mind already calculating my next move. It took me exactly 45 minutes to pack 22 years of my life into 2 cardboard boxes. As I threw my hard hat and specialized blasting galvanometer into the bed of my pickup truck, I saw my replacement walking toward the administration trailer. Greg Boomer Scott. He couldn't have been more than 25. He was wearing brand new, unscratched boots and a backward baseball cap. I recognized him from a neighboring county's road crew. He had been fired for using a bulldozer to push a stump into a live power line. He didn't possess a federal explosives license. He barely had a basic state handling permit. Hudson had hired an amateur who liked loud noises because he was cheap and easily manipulated. I drove out of the quarry gates without looking back. I didn't go home to cry. I didn't complain on social media. I drove straight to the center of town, to a modest brick building with a brass plaque that read, "David Corliss, Attorney at Law." Dave was a sharp-as-tax property and employment lawyer who had helped me navigate my divorce a decade ago. He was sitting behind his heavy oak desk, surrounded by stacks of land deeds and municipal zoning maps, when I walked in and dropped my termination letter in front of him. "Sophia," Dave said, adjusting his glasses as he read the pink slip. "I heard old man Allen passed. I assume this is the son's handiwork." "Hudson Allen," I confirmed, sitting in the leather chair opposite him. He fired me at 1:15 p.m. today. He told me to my face that women don't handle dynamite. He replaced me with an uncertified kid named Greg Scott to cut costs and speed up production on the north wall. Dave leaned back, his eyebrows raised. That's a blatant wrongful termination suit, Sophia. We have him dead to rights on gender discrimination. I can draft a complaint to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission by tomorrow morning. We'll squeeze him for a massive settlement. No, I said instantly. The word was sharp and absolute. Dave blinked. No, Sophia, he humiliated you. He fired you without cause. A settlement just hurts his insurance premiums, Dave, I explained, leaning forward, resting my elbows on his desk. I don't want his insurance money. I want his empire. I want the quarry. Dave stared at me for a long moment, making sure he had heard me correctly. You want Allen Aggregates. Sophia, that company is worth $8 million on the low end. How exactly do you plan to take it? A slow, calculated smile spread across my face. I reached into my purse and pulled out a worn, leather-bound folder. I opened it and slid a certified property deed across the desk. 5 years ago, I said quietly, Old Man Allen asked me where the quarry should expand next. I told him the most valuable limestone vein wasn't downward. It was eastward, directly into the adjacent 40-acre parcel. He laughed at me. He said the land was useless. Dave picked up the deed, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. So, you bought it. I bought the mineral and land rights for pennies, I confirmed. It's sitting right behind the north wall of the quarry. The same north wall that Hudson is about to let an uncertified kid blow to pieces. Hudson doesn't know about this land. He doesn't know the geological fault lines tie my property directly to his high wall. Dave looked up from the paper, the realization dawning in his eyes. If they screw up the blasting, if they undermine the structural integrity of the north face, the wall will collapse, I finished. And when it does, it will trigger a catastrophic landslide that will swallow my legally protected property. That's gross negligence, environmental destruction, and massive property damage. When that happens, Dave, I want you ready to freeze his assets. Dave smiled, a wolfish grin. Let him dig his own grave. It was 8:00 a.m. on a Friday morning, 4 days after I was unceremoniously escorted off the property. My phone had been aggressively silent. The crisp autumn air smelled like damp leaves instead of limestone dust, and I sat on my front porch, nursing a cup of dark roast coffee. I was officially unemployed, but I wasn't idle. From my kitchen table, which had been converted into a war room of topographic maps and geological surveys, I reviewed the structural data I had backed up from the quarry's servers years ago. The north face was an intricate puzzle of fractured dolomite and unstable clay seams. It required absolute precision, a delicate dance of delay detonators to ensure the energy of the blast shattered the rock outward into the pit, rather than backward into the mountain. At 10:15 a.m., my phone finally buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number, but the phrasing gave the sender away immediately. Sophia, it's Tommy. Use a burner if you text back. The kid is drilling a 12x12 pattern on the north bench. He's using ANFO and zero delay caps. I told him the spacing is too wide for the charge weight. He told me to shut up and dig. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. A 12x12 foot spacing with ammonium nitrate fuel oil, ANFO, and simultaneous detonation was absolute madness for that specific rock formation. It was a recipe for a massive, uncontrolled energy release. The explosive force wouldn't break the rock cleanly. It would slam into the high wall like a sledgehammer against a pane of glass, creating deep, invisible microfractures deep inside the earth. I typed back instantly. Tommy, get your crew off the lower benches. Do not let anyone park near the high wall. He is going to create a backbreak. A minute later, my phone rang. It wasn't Tommy. Hello, I answered, my voice steady. Sophia, Hudson Allen's arrogant drawl filled my ear. Are you texting my employees on company time, trying to scare them? My grip tightened on the phone. Hudson, You need to stop Boomer right now. You are drilling a pattern that is far too aggressive for the structural integrity of the north face. If he detonates that shot simultaneously, the backbreak will compromise the entire high wall." Hudson laughed. It was a dry, grating sound. "You just can't let it go, can you? You're bitter. You're sitting at home in your pajamas, trying to micromanage my quarry because you can't accept that a kid with half your experience is doing the job twice as fast. I am giving you a formal, verbal warning as a certified blasting professional," I stated clearly, ensuring my tone was firm and unmistakable. "That blast will cause catastrophic structural failure." "Here is a formal warning for you, Sophia," Hudson replied, his voice dripping with venom. "If you contact my foreman again, I will file a restraining order for harassment. We are blasting at noon. We are moving rock. Welcome to the new era." The line went dead. I didn't try to call him back. I had given him the warning. He had ignored it. I walked back to my kitchen table, picked up my geological maps, and checked the property lines of the land I owned directly behind his quarry. At 11:55 a.m., I stepped out onto my back porch, which overlooked the distant valley where the quarry was located. The air was still. I checked my watch. 12 o'clock. A low, deep rumble vibrated through the floorboards of my house. It wasn't the sharp, clean crack of a well-timed blast. It was a muffled, agonizing thud, the sound of an incredible amount of kinetic energy having nowhere to go but backward into solid stone. The ground trembled slightly beneath my feet. I closed my eyes, visualizing the deep, jagged cracks that had just been violently forced into the bedrock supporting millions of tons of limestone. The fuse was lit. It was only a matter of time before gravity took over. The next 3 weeks were agonizing. I couldn't set foot on Allen Aggregates property without risking arrest for trespassing, so I became a ghost haunting the perimeter. Every evening at dusk, when the shift ended and the massive yellow excavators went silent, I parked my truck on a public dirt road 2 miles east of the quarry. I hiked up a steep, wooded ridge carrying a high-powered spotting scope, a digital camera with a telephoto lens, and a notebook. From my vantage point, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the north high wall. The sheer drop was over 200 feet deep. Over the course of 20 days, I documented every mistake Hudson and his cheap replacement made. I became a relentless, silent observer of their incompetence. At 6:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, I set up my tripod and focused the lens on the blasted rock face. Boomer, the uncertified kid, had continued his aggressive blasting patterns. He was chasing tonnage, trying to impress Hudson with sheer volume. But through my scope, the results were horrifyingly clear. The smooth, vertical cuts I had maintained for a decade were gone. The wall was ragged, jagged, and unstable. Worse, I could see the telltale signs of a massive structural failure beginning to form. "There it is," I whispered to myself, adjusting the focus ring. A tension crack had appeared at the crest of the high wall. It started as a hairline fracture, barely visible to the naked eye. But day by day, blast by blast, it grew wider and deeper. By the end of the 3rd week, the crack was nearly 6 inches wide and spanned 50 yards along the top edge of the quarry. The massive block of stone was slowly detaching from the mountain. I snapped dozens of photographs, ensuring the time and date stamps were clearly visible on every single image. The next morning, I drove into town and walked into Dave Corliss's law office. I dropped a thick manila folder onto his desk. It was heavy with photographs, geological surveys, and a printed log of the daily blast times I had recorded. "Dave," I said, pulling up a chair, "the north wall is failing. They've compromised the high wall, and the tension crack is widening at an alarming rate." Dave opened the folder, his eyes scanning the high-resolution images of the massive fissure running along the top of the quarry. His jaw tightened. "Sophia, this is a disaster waiting to happen. If that wall comes down while men are working below it." "It's going to come down," I said grimly. "And when it does, it's going to take my 40 acres of property with it. The fault line extends straight back into the parcel I own." Dave picked up a pen, tapping it rhythmically against his desk. "Okay, we have proof of gross negligence. We have proof of the impending property damage. We need to solidify the timeline. Tommy texted me, I replied. Hudson ordered the excavators to keep digging at the toe of the wall. He's undercutting the unstable rock to get to the high-grade limestone faster. It's the ultimate rookie mistake. He's removing the foundation from a collapsing building. Dave looked at me, a mixture of awe and concern in his eyes. You're building an ironclad case for criminal negligence, Sophia, but we can't just sit here and let people get crushed. I'm not, I said firmly. I've already drafted an anonymous tip to the Mine Safety and Health Administration detailing the tension crack and the uncertified blasting. But federal bureaucracy is slow. They won't send an inspector for at least another 2 weeks. I leaned closer, resting my hands on the photographs. We don't need a federal inspector to catch him right now, Dave. We just need to let Hudson's arrogance seal his fate. When the wall falls, we strike. While Hudson Allen was busy destroying his father's legacy with dynamite, I was systematically dismantling his corporate armor from my kitchen table. With Dave Corliss's help, we initiated a quiet, ruthless audit of Allen Aggregate's public filings, property deeds, and environmental permits. We didn't need to hack into their servers. Arrogant men often left their vulnerabilities in plain sight, buried in county clerk offices and public tax records. At 9:30 a.m. on a rainy Thursday, Dave called me. Sophia, I've got the financial disclosures for the quarry. Dave's voice crackled over the phone. You were right. Old man Allen left the company to Hudson, but there's a massive catch. Sarah Klein, I said, a satisfied smile touching my lips. Exactly, Dave confirmed. Hudson's mother, Sarah, holds 60% of the voting shares. She's the silent majority owner. She lives in Florida and cares about one thing, the quarterly dividend checks. Hudson is the CEO on paper, but he's essentially just a highly paid manager. I walked over to my window, watching the rain lash against the glass. If the quarry shuts down, the dividends stop. If the dividends stop, Sarah will panic. It gets better, Dave continued, shuffling papers on his end of the line. To finance the new fleet of excavators Hudson bought when he took over, he leveraged the physical land of the quarry as collateral with a commercial bank. If the quarry ceases operation for more than 30 days, the bank can call the loan. It's a house of cards, Sophia. I processed the information quickly. Hudson had inherited a gold mine and immediately mortgaged it to buy shiny new toys. He was desperate for cash flow, which was why he had fired me and pushed Boomer to blast faster and cheaper. Dave, I need you to draft a cease and desist order regarding my property line, I instructed, my voice calm and precise. Don't send it yet. Have it ready to file the moment the dirt moves. A cease and desist. Dave asked, confused. Sophia, if the wall collapses, it's too late for a cease and desist. The damage will be done. That's the point, Dave, I explained, leaning against the kitchen counter. The order isn't to stop the collapse. It's to prove that I warned him of the immediate threat to my adjacent property, and he failed to mitigate it. When the wall falls into his pit, it will trigger a massive landslide on my land. I'll own the debris, sitting on top of his precious limestone. A low whistle came through the phone. You're going to hold his own rocks hostage. I'm going to hold his entire operation hostage, I corrected him. He fired me because he thought I was just a woman playing in the dirt. I'm going to show him how deeply I understand the ground he stands on. I hung up the phone and looked down at the map of the quarry. The tension crack was widening. The rain was lubricating the clay seams deep inside the rock face. The foundation was being aggressively undercut by a fool chasing a profit margin. The stage was set. The trap was armed. All I had to do was wait for the mountain to fall. It happened on a Tuesday at 2:15 p.m., exactly 3 weeks and 4 days after Hudson Allen handed me my pink slip. The autumn air was crisp, and the ground was saturated from 3 days of heavy rain. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, a topographical map of the quarry spread out before me. The silence in my house was broken by a sound that vibrated not just through the air, but through the foundation of my home. It wasn't the sharp, controlled crack boom of a professional blast. It was a deep, sustained, agonizing groan from the earth itself. It sounded like a massive freight train derailing a mile underground. My coffee rippled in its mug. The floorboards shivered. My phone rang instantly. "Sophia," Tommy Riggs's voice was breathless, panicked, and barely audible over the chaotic background noise of sirens and shouting men. "It's gone. The north face, it's all gone." I stood up slowly, my heart pounding a steady, cold rhythm. "Tommy, did you get the men out?" "Yes," he gasped. "Thank God, yes. We saw the tension crack opening up an hour ago. The rain lubricated the clay seams. I pulled the excavators back, but Boomer was setting charges on the lower bench. The whole damn high wall just let go. Millions of tons, Sophia. It swallowed the loaders, the drill rigs, everything. The pit is buried." I closed my eyes, visualizing the catastrophe. I had warned Hudson. I had warned the foreman. I had documented the negligence. But hearing the reality of it, the sheer, destructive force of gravity reclaiming a mountain, was sobering. "Is anyone hurt, Tommy?" I asked, my voice tight. "Boomer broke his leg running from the rockfall, but he's breathing. An ambulance is on the way. Hudson is screaming at everyone, trying to contain the chaos. But Sophia, it's bad, real bad." "How far back did the failure go, Tommy?" I asked calmly, my mind already calculating the legal ramifications of the property line. There was a long pause, filled only with the chaotic shouts of men attempting to secure a perimeter. "The backbreak didn't just stop at the crest, Sophia. It tore a hole 100 yards deep into the adjacent ridge. The trees, the topsoil, the bedrock, it's all sitting in our pit right now." A cold, calculated smile finally reached my eyes. The ridge he was describing was my property. The 40 acres I had secretly purchased 5 years ago had just catastrophically failed and spilled millions of tons of debris directly on top of Hudson Allen's multi-million-dollar limestone reserve. "Stay safe, Tommy," I said softly. "Don't sign any incident reports until OSHA or MSHA gets there. Tell your crew to keep their mouths shut." I hung up the phone and immediately dialed Dave Corliss. "Dave," I said, my voice steady and professional, "file the cease and desist, today, and initiate the property damage claim against Allen Aggregates. The wall just came down." Dave didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. I'll have the injunction filed before the 5 o'clock bell. This is it, Sophia." By 8:00 a.m. on Wednesday, Allen Aggregates was a fortress. The massive iron gates at the entrance were padlocked shut. Security guards, hired hastily overnight, patrolled the perimeter. The local news had a helicopter circling the crater, broadcasting the devastation. I watched the live feed on my television, sipping tea. The north wall of the quarry was unrecognizable. Where there had once been a sheer, profitable cliff face, there was now a sprawling, chaotic mountain of shattered dolomite, mud, uprooted trees, and mangled yellow excavators. The heart of Hudson's operation was buried under 30 feet of my property. My phone rang at 10:30 a.m. It was Dave. "Sophia, you're not going to believe this," Dave said, his voice laced with amusement. "Hudson's lawyers just filed an emergency motion to access your property." I raised an eyebrow. "Access my property for what?" "They're claiming the collapse was a natural disaster," Dave chuckled darkly. "An act of God caused by the heavy rainfall. They want an easement onto your 40 acres to begin clearing the debris off their limestone." I laughed out loud. It was a cold, sharp sound in the quiet kitchen. An act of God. Hudson thinks he can blame the rain for 3 weeks of aggressive, uncertified blasting that undermined a stable high wall. He's trying to cover his tracks. "Exactly," Dave confirmed. "If he can legally frame it as a natural landslide, his insurance pays for the cleanup, and he avoids criminal negligence charges. If he admits his own blasting caused it, his insurance drops him, and the state shuts him down. He needs to clear that rock fast to keep the quarry operating," I deduced, pacing the length of my kitchen. "If he doesn't move aggregate, he can't pay the mortgage on his shiny new equipment. The bank will foreclose." And the only way he can safely clear the debris from the top down is by staging heavy machinery on your land, Dave finished, which is currently sitting right on the new, highly unstable edge of the crater. I walked over to my war room table and traced the property line with my finger. Hudson was desperate. He was backed into a corner of his own making, and now he was trying to use my land to dig himself out. Dave, I instructed firmly, deny the easement. File an immediate trespassing injunction. Tell his lawyers that if a single tire touches my property, we will have the sheriff arrest him. Furthermore, notify them that the millions of tons of debris currently sitting in his pit belong to me. It is my property, and they are not authorized to move, process, or sell a single pebble of it. Dave whistled softly. You're paralyzing him. He can't dig out his own quarry without stealing your dirt. Precisely, I smiled. He wanted to play in the dirt without knowing the rules. Now he's going to learn the hard way. The pressure on Hudson Allen intensified rapidly over the next 2 weeks. With my trespassing injunction in place, his massive cleanup operation ground to a complete halt. His crew of 50 men was reduced to maintaining the perimeter and twiddling their thumbs while their paychecks drained the company's dwindling cash reserves. But the real fatal blow wasn't my legal maneuvering. It was the arrival of the Mine Safety and Health Administration, MSHA. I had anonymously tipped them off 3 weeks prior to the collapse. The federal inspectors descended on Allen aggregates like a swarm of angry hornets. They seized the blasting logs, interviewed Tommy Riggs, and commandeered the site for a full forensic investigation. On a gloomy Thursday afternoon at 4:00 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a stern-looking man in a crisp windbreaker holding a clipboard. A silver badge hung from his belt. Sophia Young. He asked politely, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. I'm Lead Inspector Vance with MSHA. I understand you were the lead blasting engineer here until a month ago. I was, I replied, stepping back to let him into the foyer. Ms. Young, we are conducting a preliminary investigation into the catastrophic highwall failure at Allen Aggregates, Inspector Vance stated, pulling a pen from his pocket. The current CEO, Hudson Allen, claims the collapse was entirely unpredictable, a result of unprecedented rainfall on a naturally unstable fault line. I scoffed, leaning against the doorframe. Inspector, the fault line was stable for a decade. The only thing unprecedented was the aggressive, simultaneous detonation of ANFO on a 12x12 grid by an uncertified operator, directly undercutting a tension crack that I formally warned Mr. Allen about. Inspector Vance paused, his pen hovering over the clipboard. You warned him, formally. I gave him a verbal warning the day he fired me, I said calmly. And I have photographic evidence of the tension crack widening over 3 weeks, alongside detailed logs of the improper blasting techniques utilized by my replacement. I walked over to the hallway table, picked up a thick manila envelope, and handed it to the federal inspector. It contained copies of everything Dave Corliss and I had compiled. Vance opened the envelope and flipped through the high-resolution, time-stamped photographs of the massive fissure growing day by day, blast by blast. He reviewed the detailed notes I had taken from my vantage point on the ridge. His face grew darker with every page. This is, Vance started, looking up at me in disbelief. This is gross, willful negligence. He ignored every fundamental safety protocol in the book to chase a higher daily yield. He wanted to speed up production by 30%, I stated flatly. He told me women don't handle dynamite and that he needed a cheaper, hungrier crew. So, he hired a 25-year-old kid with no federal license to blow up the foundation of his own quarry. Vance closed the folder sharply. The evidence was irrefutable. Hudson's act of God defense had just been completely dismantled by a meticulous, undeniable paper trail. Ms. Young, Inspector Vance said gravely, based on this evidence, I am shutting down Allen Aggregates indefinitely. We will be issuing massive fines, and I will be forwarding this file to the Department of Justice for criminal negligence. I nodded slowly, a deep, resonant satisfaction settling in my chest. Hudson Allen was officially drowning, and I was holding the only life raft. The fallout from the MSHA investigation was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours of Inspector Vance reviewing my meticulous documentation, Allen Aggregates was placed under a federal stop-work order. The yellow padlocks on the front gates were replaced by heavy, official chain-link seals bearing the crest of the United States government. The local news helicopters that had been circling the pit for days finally had their headline: "Gross negligence shuts down historic quarry." It was 9:00 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning, exactly 6 weeks after Hudson had sneered at me in the mud, when Dave Corliss called me. "Sophia, put on your best suit," Dave said, his voice buzzing with a predatory energy. "Hudson's lawyers just called. They're requesting an emergency mediation session. They want to settle the property damage suit, the trespassing injunction, and the wrongful termination claim all at once." I smiled, looking out my kitchen window toward the silent, dormant crater in the distance. "He's bleeding out, Dave. The bank is calling the loan on his excavators, MSHA is drafting criminal charges, and his mother's dividend checks have stopped." "He's cornered," Dave agreed. "The mediation is set for 2:00 p.m. today at their corporate office downtown. They think they can cut you a check to make the lawsuit go away so they can focus on fighting the feds." "Let them think that," I replied, my voice hard. "I'll meet you at your office at 1:00 p.m. At exactly 1:55 p.m., Dave and I walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Allen Aggregates' downtown headquarters. The room smelled of expensive leather and desperation. Hudson Allen was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked 10 years older than the day he fired me. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by deep, dark circles under his eyes and a frantic, nervous energy. His tailored suit looked slightly rumpled. Flanking him were 3 high-priced corporate attorneys who looked equally exhausted. Sitting quietly in the corner, staring out the window with an expression of cold fury, was Sarah Klein, Hudson's mother and the silent majority shareholder. She had flown up from Florida the moment the federal stop-work order hit the news. Dave and I took our seats opposite them. I didn't say a word. I simply placed my hands flat on the cool mahogany and waited. Hudson cleared his throat, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked at his lead attorney, a slick man named Harrison, who immediately launched into a prepared, aggressive opening statement. "Ms. Young, Mr. Corliss," Harrison began, attempting to command the room. "We are here today to resolve the unfortunate, unforeseen geological event that impacted your adjacent property. While Allen Aggregates admits no fault in the natural landslide, we are prepared to offer a generous settlement of $1.5 million for the property damage, the trespassing injunction, and your subsequent termination, provided you sign a strict non-disclosure agreement." Dave let out a short, sharp laugh. $1.5 million. "Gentlemen, the debris currently sitting on top of your prime limestone reserve belongs to my client. You cannot move it, process it, or sell it without her permission. Your quarry is paralyzed until she allows you to clean it up." Harrison narrowed his eyes. "We have heavy machinery. We can clear the debris from the bottom up. It will be expensive, but we don't need her land to do it." "You can't do anything, Mr. Harrison," I finally spoke, my voice calm, steady, and utterly lethal. The entire room went dead silent. Even Sarah Klein turned to look at me. I pulled a thick white envelope from my briefcase and slid it across the table toward Hudson. "I received a copy of the finalized MSHA report this morning," I said, leaning forward. "Inspector Vance concluded that the collapse was caused by gross, willful negligence. Your client authorized the use of an uncertified blaster, ignored proper spacing, and utilized excessive ANFO charges directly beneath a documented tension crack that I formally warned him about." Hudson swallowed hard, his face turning pale. "Because of this," I continued, my eyes locked on Hudson's terrified face, "the federal government is not only levying $3 million in fines against Allen Aggregates, but they are recommending criminal charges against you personally, Hudson, for reckless endangerment. The color completely drained from Sarah Klein's face. She stood up, her hands trembling. Criminal charges. Hudson, you told me this was a rain-induced slide. You told me the insurance was handling it. Mom, sit down, Hudson hissed, panic rising in his voice. They're bluffing. The lawyers are handling it. We aren't bluffing, Hudson. Dave interjected smoothly, handing copies of the MSHA summary to the opposing counsel. The insurance company denied your claim yesterday afternoon based on this preliminary finding. You are entirely liable for the cleanup, the fines, and the bank loans. I watched as the reality of his situation crushed the arrogance out of him. The silver spoon had finally snapped. Here is the reality of your situation, Hudson, I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of 22 years of experience in that pit. Your company is dead in the water. You have no cash flow. You owe the bank $4 million on equipment that is currently buried under my dirt. You owe the federal government $3 million in fines. And you are looking at federal prison time. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. $1.5 million doesn't even cover the interest on the debt you've accrued in the last 6 weeks. I don't want your settlement money. I want the company. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Hudson's lawyers began shouting over each other, protesting the absurdity of my demand. Hudson himself stood up, his face red with a mixture of rage and humiliation. You're out of your mind. Hudson yelled, slamming his hands on the table. You think you can just walk in here and steal my father's company? You're a fired, disgruntled employee. You're nothing. Hudson, shut your mouth. Sarah Klein's voice cracked like a whip across the room. She wasn't looking at me. She was glaring at her son with absolute, icy contempt. She slowly walked around the table, picked up the MSHA report, and scanned the brutal, undeniable facts of her son's incompetence. She read about the uncertified blaster, the ignored warnings, and the impending criminal charges. When she finished, she dropped the report onto the mahogany surface as if it were radioactive. You arrogant, stupid boy, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with fury. Your father spent 30 years building this company from a single gravel pit. He warned me you didn't respect the work. He warned me you only cared about the spreadsheets. She turned slowly and looked at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in her eyes. Ms. Young, you knew my husband. You worked for him for 2 decades. I respected your husband, Mrs. Klein, I replied honestly. He understood the danger of the quarry. He listened to the experts he hired. Your son fired me to save a few dollars and then blew up the foundation of the business. Sarah took a deep breath, composing herself. She was a ruthless businesswoman who suddenly realized she was holding a sinking ship. She looked at her son, then at his lawyers, and finally back at Dave Corliss. What is your actual proposal, Mr. Corliss? Sarah asked coldly. Dave pulled a freshly drafted legal document from his briefcase. My client, Sophia Young, will acquire 70% of the voting shares of Allen Aggregates for the sum of $1. In exchange, she will assume all corporate debt, including the bank loans and the pending MSHA fines. Hudson gasped, Mom, you can't. That's my inheritance. Quiet, Sarah snapped, her eyes never leaving Dave. And what about the criminal charges against my son? Ms. Young will sign an affidavit stating that while Mr. Allen was technically the CEO, he lacked the operational knowledge to fully understand the consequences of the blasting decisions, Dave explained smoothly. She will testify that the uncertified blaster, Greg Scott, acted recklessly and independently in the field. It won't clear Hudson entirely. He'll likely face a massive personal fine and a lifetime ban from operating a heavy industry business, but it will keep him out of federal prison. I watched Hudson sink back into his chair, defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken. He had tried to push me out of my livelihood because of my gender and his greed. Now, his only salvation was begging me to take his company to keep him out of a jail cell. Furthermore, Dave continued, Ms. Young will immediately lift the trespassing injunction, allowing the quarry to begin cleanup operations using her adjacent property as a staging ground. Because she owns the debris, She will process and sell the topsoil and fractured rock to begin paying down the debt immediately. Sarah Klein looked at the document for a long, silent minute. She was calculating the survival of her family's wealth against the absolute ruin her son had caused. "Hudson," Sarah said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Sign the transfer." "Imam." "Sign it," she roared, her composure finally breaking. "You bankrupted us in 6 weeks. You destroyed your father's legacy because you wouldn't listen to the woman who actually knew how to run the pit. Sign the paper, or I will let the feds lock you in a cage." Hudson's hands shook uncontrollably as his lawyer slid the pen across the table. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He signed his name, his massive, fragile ego shattering right there on the mahogany table. When Sarah countersigned the document, officially transferring the majority ownership of the company to me, she slid the paper back to Dave. "The quarry is yours, Ms. Young," Sarah said quietly. "Fix it." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. I looked down at Hudson, who was staring blankly at his empty hands. "Women don't handle dynamite, Hudson," I said, echoing his own arrogant words back at him. "We handle the fallout. Now get out of my boardroom, you're fired." 6 months later, the dust had finally settled. The massive cleanup operation at the newly renamed Young Aggregates was grueling, but profitable. By utilizing my 40 acres as a staging ground, we safely cleared the debris from the top down. We processed the fallen rock, crushed it, and sold it to the county for road base, using the revenue to pay down the massive MSHA fines Hudson had incurred. I reinstated Tommy Riggs as my lead foreman and personally oversaw the hiring of a new, fully certified blasting crew. The north face was stabilized, the pit was humming with activity, and the yellow excavators were finally digging into the pure, high-grade limestone Old Man Allen had built his empire on. Hudson Allen was long gone. After paying a massive personal fine that bankrupted his trust fund, he moved out of state, legally barred from ever holding an executive position in a heavy industry or mining operation again. He traded his tailored suits and sports cars for a quiet, humiliating obscurity. It was 5:00 p.m. on a Friday evening in early May. The air was warm, and the loud, rhythmic grinding of the rock crushers had finally ceased for the weekend. I sat on my back porch, nursing a cold beer, looking out over the distant, gaping crater in the earth. It wasn't just a pit anymore. It was my empire.